When the World Trade Organization convened in Seattle, Washington, and the United States in 1999, they were met by a series of demonstrations from anti-globalization movements, which included non-governmental organizations, trade unions, students, religious groups, and anarchists. With estimated numbers of protesters reaching over 40,000, it was not long before tensions between police and protesters erupted and the scene turned to violence. Adopted almost as an unofficial soundtrack for the situation was the music of Rage Against the Machine, a radical protest rock group born in Los Angeles in 1991. Although not part of the demonstrations in Seattle, the influence of Rage's provocative songs from their 3 original studio albums, along with their practice of social activism and promotion of direct action, had helped to educate a generation of 90s youths, many of whom would be there to fight for their voices to be heard and to stand up for what they believed in.
When Rage Against the Machine entered the national stage, there wasn't a really focused protest movement in the same way there was in the 60s. They combined the power of hip-hop and hard rock, 2 different forms that have 2 different protest traditions, and brought them together for a young audience that really appreciated both. Rage Against the Machine gave young, progressive people their own voice, their own band, their own way to rally, and that's always so important in creating a spirit of protest among the young.
Rage Against the Machine is sort of the Malcolm X to Woody Guthrie's Martin Luther King. You know, there's a difference there. There's just a more aggressive form of protest compared to the more folky kind of thing that people associate with protest music. Woody Guthrie played an acoustic guitar and said, "This machine kills fascists," and Rage Against the Machine, they may actually come get you.
Rage was significant as a protest band in that they made protest popular again in American music. This is a band that was selling millions of records. It was selling out stadiums all across the United States. It was getting play on MTV. That was unprecedented. And also the type of politics that it was espousing, it seemed pretty strange for a band that radical to get signed to a major American record label, let alone sell all the albums that did.
Zack really spoke what he felt, and I think that's really what made that band great, because they really had this powerful voice and this really wonderful thing that had to be said.
Rage Against the Machine started life in Los Angeles in 1991. Lead vocalist Zack de la Rocha joined forces with drummer Brad Wilk and bass player Tim Commerford, along with Harvard graduate Tom Morello on guitar, to start work on a band that would bring the sentiment of protest back into mainstream music, where it had been absent for so long. Given the background of de la Rocha and Morello, Rage's 2 dynamic and passionate frontmen, it was no surprise that protest and social activism were the main driving forces of their music.
Zack de la Rocha, Tom Morello are both the children of 70s radicals. Very clearly the children of 70s political and artistic radicals.
Tom was a child of college-educated parents, so he grew up in that academic environment.
His mom, Mary, was as much of a radical as anyone. She, I think, instilled that activism in Tom from an early age. I think she was somebody who was very politically aware. She had a great breadth of experience. She lived in Kenya for a while. That's where, where she met his father.
Zack, his mom was a grad student here at the University of California, Irvine in Orange County, while his dad was a member of a legendary Chicano art movement. The Chicano movement is basically Mexican Americans who were politicized during the 60s.
Beto de la Rocha, he was part of the Los Four, which was a Latino group of artists that had, big shows in the early 70s in Los Angeles. He was somebody who was, very conscious of what was going on and made a, distinct effort to kind of try and change things.
Both, interestingly, children of color who grew up in white suburbs because they come from mixed-race parentage, Morello does, and who experienced in these white suburbs of Chicago and Los Angeles racism from their classmates in grade school or high school, and who reacted strongly to that, who took that pain home and were told, in both cases by their mothers, you don't have to put up with this. This is bullshit. You know, and so they take these proud political ideals of their parents' generation forward to a younger generation.
So Zack grew up with both of those elements, so sort of the academic movement and then the more roots protest from the street movement. But also, by his own admission, he got radicalized here in Orange County. Of course, the rest of the world knows Orange County for its very horrible conservative politics and its vacuous housewives. So the story that he tells is that he was at University High School in Irvine, very prestigious high school. And during a biology class, his biology professor talks about this immigration checkpoint that's at the very southern tip of Orange County, and the professor called it the wetback station. And all the students laughed except Zack. He had never really given much thought to his Mexican identity until that point. And then he said from that day on, he just was really angry. He was really angry with racist, imperialist politics, and that was really the genesis of Rage, at least of the one part of Rage. But with Tom, it was already there.
The influence on Zack and Tom from both Mary Morello and Beto de la Rocha, coupled with their experiences of racism whilst growing up, lay the foundations for Rage's agenda to provide a voice for the disaffected youth of the day. Protest in art and music, however, was not anything new in American society by the time Rage Against the Machine appeared in the public eye, and had a long and important history in shaping the country and the world.
Well, think about the fact that all forms of art have protests. There's protest poetry, there are protest novels, there are protest paintings, but the phrase protest music is the only one that really echoes as a kind of cultural phrase. And the reason is there's something very, very powerful and special about music. It's incredibly movable. It can move from one place to the next. It doesn't require a lot of equipment, a lot of time, energy. And so there's been music protest for thousands of years. Every culture creates music that is used as protest because every culture has oppression, has inequality. And so it's a very, very adaptable medium, and that's why it's the central form of artistic protest in any kind of cultural context.
The thing about protest songs, in general, can be said that it's not the people who are satisfied with the way things are going that have created protest songs. You don't find many protest songs written by investment bankers or oil magnates. It's poor people or working people who wish for a better time, a better life. And that's nothing new. I mean, it's been going on for centuries in this country, in the U.S. People have been protesting ever since they realized there was something to protest about. In my awareness of protest songs, it really started with, I guess you might say, the industrialization of the country in the late 19th and early 20th century.
Although protest in song had been around for centuries and in America found its roots in the Civil War, the key turning point in bringing it to a wider audience came during the early 20th century and the birth of the labor movement. The Industrial Workers of the World Organization, founded in 1905, led folk artists such as Joe Hill to voice their disapproval against the establishment.
There was an organization called the IWW, which got formed in the early part of the 20th century. And they also recognized the power of song, and particularly a Swedish immigrant named Joseph Hillström, who shortened his name to Joe Hill, and was a genius in terms of creating satirical songs about issues of the day.
Hill's work with the IWW from 1910 onwards, and his songs criticizing company bosses and the like, made him popular amongst the workers, but a perceived threat to the people in power. When Hill was arrested under suspicion of murder in 1914 and subsequently given the death penalty, it was alleged that his involvement in the protest movement and the IWW led to his poor treatment, unfair case, and eventual execution.
Joe Hill was a thorn in the side of the establishment, shall we say, and was treated like a political prisoner. Although he protested his innocence and probably was innocent, he was executed. And the name Joe Hill then entered into the legend of American protest music. I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he. The copper bosses shot you, Joe. They killed you, Joe, said I. Takes more than guns to kill a man. Says Joe, I didn't die. Says Joe, I didn't die. My awareness of this kind of music really came about hearing recordings and songs by Woody Guthrie. The Dust Bowl ballads, farmers being dispossessed from their land because their crops were just completely dusted over. There was nowhere to go. They went to California, and as Woody said, California is a Garden of Eden, but you won't find it so hot if you ain't got that do-re-mi. So they found a way to protest even when they were in the Garden of Eden.
This land is your land, and this land is my land, from the California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. As I went a-walking that ribbon of highway, I saw above me that endless skyway, saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me.
You know, Woody Guthrie's This Land Is Your Land is actually a protest song. It's weird to think of it that way because, you know, when you're a kid in America, you grow up singing that song in like kindergarten, you know? So you can learn about the geography of the United States, right? But Woody Guthrie wrote it as a protest song in reaction to God Bless America, a kind of song that would really piss the guys in Rage Against the Machine off because, well, it mentions God and it mentions America, two things they'd like to do away with, right? But Woody Guthrie writes this song in order to say, you know, this land belongs to you. This is yours. Doesn't belong to anybody else. Doesn't belong to God, doesn't belong to people in Washington, doesn't belong to anyone at any corporation or anywhere. It's your land. You go wherever you want. You do whatever you want. This land was made for you and me. It's a universal song.
So the Dust Bowl ballads of Woody Guthrie are monumental protest songs, although the concept or the term protest really hadn't existed or hadn't been born yet. It was just the way people began to express themselves. People who had something to say and chose to say it in music and in poetry, or setting poems to familiar tunes, and it just grew from there.
Woody Guthrie was a really central figure. He was very much a part of that labor movement. He was very close to the entire left, including the Communist Party, and he really was the first major voice to catalyze the union movement songs to a wider audience. And very much in concert with his friend Pete Seeger and others, the Almanac Singers, they become a real bridge between the labor movement and later movements like the Civil Rights Movement.
As Rage Against the Machine would later endeavor to do, both Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger sought to bring their message to a wider audience, utilizing the power of song.
Well, there's nothing like getting people singing together, either just to have a good time or to argue about something. There's this great impulse to express yourself in song. And a simple rhyme, repeated over and over again, a catchy tune, very often a tune that people knew from another context, was fitted with new sets of words.
I have a hammer in the morning, I have a hammer in the evening, all over this land, I have freedom, I hammer out free,
It was Pete Seeger, though, I think, who realized very early on that getting masses of people to sing together was a very, very vital way to get a message across. Not that everybody had to know all the words, but if they could be taught the catch line of the chorus, somehow to join in. And all of a sudden, slowly, people began to hear this new kind, what they thought was new kind of music.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday.
What Guthrie and Seeger achieved in bringing protest songs to the people represented the formative stage in the growing cultural significance of American protest music throughout the latter half of the 20th century. Another key figure in the popularization and spread of the protest tradition was Bob Dylan.
I think it's important when talking about protest music to talk about two different kinds. One is the kind actually produced in the movement. And a good example of that is the African American Civil Rights Movement. Their old songs from the gospel tradition, from what they're called freedom songs, were adapted and actually used in the movement, used in demonstrations, used in the churches where they organized and kind of prepared themselves, used in the jails when they were arrested for civil disobedience. It was very much woven into the everyday life of the activists. And then you have a kind of more distant but equally important kind of protest movement that is from artists who are associated with or supportive of. Bob Dylan is a classic example of this. He became marginally involved in the civil rights movement in groups like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, but he was not a heavy activist. But his songs became very important in spreading the word about the movement to a wider audience, particularly of young, white, middle, and working class kids. And so he provided a kind of link to the larger movement.
How many roads must a man walk down before you call him a man? Yes, and how many seas must a white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand? Yes, and how many times must the cannonballs fly before they fall out of the band? The answer, my friend, is a blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind.
A group like Rage Against the Machine is kind of in between. They, of course, were the soundtrack for a number of demonstrations, which were really important. They also were very much a link to the wider protest movement. They brought in people who first hear the music and then hear the lyrics. There's a wonderful comment from a rock and roller who said, basically, you hear the music and you forget what you're singing it before you know what you're singing. And that is a very seductive way of involving yourself in the movement. You hear something, it draws you in, and then suddenly you realize there's content there that you need to pay attention to. And I think the unusual thing about Rage was that they became very popular. They were, for a political band, they were amazingly popular, and that meant that their message was getting out to a wide audience.
Dylan's involvement and association with the protest movement in the 1960s brought the message of peace through the use of song to a larger audience and united people over contemporary issues. However, the onset of the Vietnam War was to push protest music further into the mainstream, with an array of other artists utilizing the medium to speak out against the government.
Each war produced its own protest movement, World War I, World War II. Most dramatically, of course, the Vietnam War. And the Vietnam War coincided with the rise of rock and roll as a major aesthetic form. And so much of the protest movement of the 60s had a soundtrack of rock and roll. That played, again, drew upon earlier traditions, but added something new to it. And again, it was a combination of both the new and the old in very powerful ways.
There's something happening here, but what it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop, children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
There was not really an outpouring of songs like that until the Vietnam War came along. And it wasn't only Pete. It was Tom Paxton. It was Phil Oakes. It was Bob Dylan.
What you have happening is an expansion of the music industry and music as an industry at this very same time that anti-war protest is growing. They in effect fed each other. So you have movement music becoming virtually indistinguishable from mainstream music in a way that hasn't been true since. You have a very vast audience. You have events like Woodstock where the entire festival has an anti-war component to it. So it was a strange way in which rock and roll became identified almost as protest music, even when the actual number of protest songs was a relatively small proportion.
Rock and roll inherited the mantle of popular protest music from the traditional folk scene, which, although no longer as prevalent, would always remain as an outlet for political opposition. The Vietnam War proved to be a peak within the protest movement in both quantity and popularity of music protesting a cause. As the 1970s dawned, artists such as John Lennon with songs like Give Peace a Chance and Imagine continued to offer a simple and widely spread message in mainstream music. However, by this time, protested music began to dissolve into more specialized areas, with no one style or genre encapsulating the sentiment. Towards the end of the decade, protested music appeared in rock and roll, reggae, folk, and also on the emerging punk scene, with artists such as The Clash tackling political issues and providing a voice for a generation. Yet as a movement, protest in song had faded from the public consciousness. Another branch that grew from the initial protest scene in the United States came about during the 1980s in hip-hop and rap, as well as hardcore punk. This in turn went on to influence both Zack de la Rocha and Tom Morello, paving the way for Rage Against the Machine's eventual sound, style, and approach.
Two main spirits of protest in Rage Against the Machine are Tom Morello and Zack de la Rocha. They bring different influences to the table. Zack was a hardcore kid. He was influenced by hardcore punk, indie rock, bands like Minor Threat, artists who in the 1980s were making loud political noises on an underground stage. Tom has that genius hard rock guitar influence. Also, he's very influenced by hip hop, but he's also influenced by folk music. His more recent solo music has been of a kind of a Woody Guthrie bent. So here you have all the pieces in place. You have hip hop, artists like Public Enemy. I would say Los Angeles artists like NWA are also influential on Rage Against the Machine. You have hardcore punk, and you have a little bit of that classic folky protest underneath it all, keeping it earnest.
Public Enemy's influence on Zack in particular was to create a significant part of Rage Against the Machine's agenda, both sonically and in subject matter.
I think a band like Public Enemy was a huge influence on Rage Against the Machine because, and I'd say even more so on Zack than, say, Tom, because you listen to those early Public Enemy records, they're pretty spare, but it's Chuck D is right there, his vocals are, pressed forward, and, it sounds very aggressive. It sounds hectic. You listen to, like, Fight the Power or something like that. It's like there's an urgency there that's immediate.
Here's the interesting thing about Public Enemy at the tail end of the 80s. They absolutely change what you can accomplish. Musically, certainly. I mean, this is denser music than anyone has ever made before. They are the rap group that most understands the power of the electric guitar, certainly Run DMC as well. But right in that moment at the tail end of the 80s, there is Public Enemy like doing weird stuff with drums and guitars and totally changing the idea of how the guitar can function inside of music.
So woman makes the men all pause, and if you got a woman, she might make you forget yours. There's a 5-letter word to describe her character, but her brain's being washed by an actor. And every real man that tries to approach comes a close he comes, it gets just like a rope. I don't think I can handle. She goes channel to channel, cold looking for that hero. She watched Channel Zero.
The other thing Public Enemy does is they radically change the notion of what you can and should talk about in hip-hop. It will be radically changed back very shortly by Dr. Dre, by Snoop Dogg, by Tupac. But for a brief moment, from 1988 to about 1992, Public Enemy forced everyone in hip-hop to think politically.
Before Public Enemy, there really wasn't this central voice of consciousness in rap. There were great rap singles, like The Message, that represented urban life, but a lot of early rap was about boasting, expressing yourself, talking about your neighborhood, spinning tall tales. Here comes Public Enemy with a message, with a purpose to raise the consciousness of African American people and of America in general. Chuck D of Public Enemy has famously called their music the Black People's CNN. It was supposed to tell you about the issues of the day, and the producers of Public Enemy used a sound that sounded like the city falling apart. It sounded like sirens and cops running at you and windows being broken. So the combination of that powerful, chaotic sound and Chuck D's kind of preacherly voice, Jesse Jackson-style voice, really showed a new path for political music that I think Rage has really picked up on.
Following in the footsteps of the forefathers of protest music, Zack, Tom, Tim and Brad utilised the state of the nation and the anger of the people to create their explosive debut on the music scene. A demo of 12 tracks that soon picked up strong interest from several major labels.
Tom Morello was in a band called Lock Up that was signed to Geffen previously to me being, seeing Rage Against the Machine. So there's a girl who was working for me named Colleen Combs, and we worked together, and she said, Tom Morello started a new band. And I said, oh, wow, that's really interesting. Aren't they signed to Geffen? And she said, no, I actually think that they're free and clear. You should go see them. So knowing what an amazing guitar player he was, I sort of jumped on the opportunity and went to a rehearsal space in the San Fernando Valley. And she had organized it for me. I walked into the rehearsal room, and Rage Against the Machine was set up. They were leisurely sort of rehearsing, and then I sat down for about 15 minutes, and I would say 45 seconds into the first song, I said, this is one of the greatest bands I've ever seen in my life, and basically we chased them from there.
After a bad experience with previous band Lock Up, Morello was wary of record company contracts, and with Zack's determination to get his message across unimpeded, the band eventually signed to Epic, who granted them full creative control, which for a protest act with a distinct message was a very significant move.
Rage had complete freedom lyrically, musically, visually, artwork. I was really blessed, as were they, to be in a situation where I think people really understood the importance of the band. And while there may have been challenges and there may have been questions and there may have been issues about trying to figure out how to actually sell more records and reach more people, fundamentally, I don't believe there's anything that ever came out that the band didn't fully sign off on.
A deal now in place, the band set to work on their first album with producer Garth Richardson, as they endeavoured to harness the power and aggression of their live performance to bring their message to the masses.
We had basically set up a whole system inside of the live room. where we had actually set up a whole, basically, huge system, concert PA system, and then Zack and Tim and Tom were in front of the PA system, and we had Brad in the back. And I wanted them to do their live show because I didn't want to have them come in and, okay, now you have to stand like this and you can't move and you have to stuff. And they just played it live off the floor, and that was kind of how I had heard the actual demos. Demos had felt, really kind of had that power to them.
It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, and it felt to me like an amalgamation of everything that I ever thought was great about rock music. An intensity, a point of view, a power. Rhythmically, it was undeniable in terms of drums and bass, Brad and Tim. And Rage Against the Machine, to me, was uncomparable, and undeniable at the same time.
Zack's voice is also undeniable. It's like a scream heard from your neighbor's window. You have to go see what's happening. And I think coupled with Tom Morello's guitar, which was modeled after the Hank Shocklee style Public Enemy production, the Bomb Squad production, Tom's guitar was meant to invoke sirens and bottles breaking. And those two things combining, Zack's voice, Tom's guitar, plus with that heavy rhythm bed underneath it, it was startling, it was ugly, it was disturbing, and it totally brought people to their feet.
We spent a lot of time getting sounds and making sure that we captured stuff for them. You didn't really have to go after a sound because the sound was already there. They basically, when they played, you were just like, holy shit.
One of the songs off his first album talks about, I made this rhyme from my notebook, just very much getting from the hip hop of the time, which is very much preaching, preaching to the masses, trying to create a revolution through lyrics, through music form. Hip hop, it's very much about the writer, the scribe of the streets. And so Zack took that approach into creating the lyrics for Rage, but also, like hip hop then, he very much took that approach in addressing the crowd at the time, explaining the lyrics, saying this is what we're singing, this is why, this is what you need to know about, and this is what you have to do afterwards after you listen to our music.
Rage Against the Machine's seminal self-titled debut album was released in November 1992 and had an immediate impact on the music scene, not only for its infusion of rap and hard rock, but also for its strong political message that was designed to incite and engage its listeners.
They kind of struck a discordant note in the sense that the other bands that were popular around them were, kind of very self-indulgent or, singing about things that were very much about themselves. You look at who was on the early Lollapalooza, it was like Nirvana and Pearl Jam, and it was all about like angst. But, I think Rage Against the Machine projected from the start a knowledge that most bands don't have and an interest in what was going on in the world around them. It was like they were very committed to making music, and the music they made was exciting, but for them it was also, they wanted to use the music as a microphone to turn up the volume on some of the the causes that they thought were important at that time.
In 92, that's, we're in the midst of a recession. Here in Southern California, we had the LA riots, which none of that was happening in Orange County, but still, it was very much a psychological scar on all Southern California. In 2 years after 92 becomes 1994, that's when you have this backlash against immigrants, specifically against Mexicans, but that was already boiling up here in Orange County. So 92, that era, like the early 90s, was really just this bubbling cauldron ready to explode. That's where a lot of the animus that comes out in Rage's original album, it came from that, just that anger and almost a desperation to rebel against those forces that they knew were going to be, those reactionary forces that were going to come.
The anger behind the music was very apparent and provided an appropriate backdrop for Rage Against the Machine to convey their radical, anti-establishment message, even with the endorsement of their record company.
I think that there was a lot of support for the sentiment. I think the bigger challenges for Epic/Sony at the time was the desire of the band to not edit profanity, to not edit lyrical content, and for the company then be able to sort of market the record unto itself. I mean, we sat down, and I think I was probably fairly instrumental in picking the first single with the band, a song called Killing in the Name, and I think, I haven't actually counted lately, but there were 20 to 30 fucks in it. And we made a conscious decision that that would be should be the first song that people should hear, whether they heard it or not. So ultimately, a lot of radio stations did their own edits. The band refused to edit the song, for the reasons that you would expect them to. So it became, I think ultimately it became a huge song.
Some of those that work forces are the same that burn crosses. Some of those that work forces are the same that burn crosses. Some of those that work forces are the same that burn crosses. Some of those that work forces are the same that burn crosses. Killing in the name of. Killing in the name of.
Killing in the Name really epitomizes Zack de la Rocha's worldview from the very get-go of his career. He's anti-capitalist, he's anti-clerical, he's anti-authoritarian. It's not quite clear what he's pro. He's definitely trying to rip down idols. And then the sound of it has that preacherly, Chuck D-inspired kind of authority that puts you in the mind of a new kind of idol or a new kind of leader. So there's that sense that Killing in the Name is going to take people into the streets.
For a band to come in with a track like Killing in the Name on their debut album, it had a tremendous effect because, it was the kind of thing where you couldn't ignore it. It was very aggressive, and it was the kind of thing you'd see it on MTV, the videos in heavy rotation. You're looking at this and, it seems like, there's something happening here that you haven't been seeing. You look around, it's like the big bands of that era, they really weren't thinking about that kind of stuff. Like Jane's Addiction was very creative, but they were kind of like, they were on their own kind of like drug trip, and, obviously like Nirvana was huge, but, Kurt Cobain was really worried about Kurt Cobain. He wasn't so interested in, what was going on a larger level. But this was something where, you could listen and you'd be like, there's something happening. These people are furious, and I kind of want to know what it's about. Because I think a lot of times when people listen to music, a lot of people don't ever hear the lyrics, but that kind of aggression in music is something that I think kind of turns people's head around, and then it can kind of be like the Trojan horse, like somebody who might not really listen to that kind of music, they hear that, and you know, they might love the music, but they might not be somebody who spends a lot of time thinking about politics. But then they hear a track like that, it's like, maybe I got to do some homework, you know, do a little research.
On the one hand, you really have to admire Rage Against the Machine for what they accomplish, which is to bring into an essentially apolitical time politics, radical politics. On the other hand, it is worth noting that the politics that they bring in are very general. And the way that they connect with their audience, particularly at the start, is through slogans, bumper stickers that basically say, "Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me." Now, the kids who latch on to that song on the first Rage Against the Machine record, Killing in the Name, they're not thinking, well, not all of them, some of them are listening to the song and thinking, yes, you know, the American way of life is corrupt, emotionally, spiritually, politically, socially. We must resist the mind control of the corporate structure. You know what a lot of other kids are thinking when they hear that song? Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. I'm going out tonight and having a beer. As many beers as I want. This too is a form of liberation, but not exactly the liberation that the Rage guys have in mind when they write that song.
Killing in the Name was Rage's first single and proved to be a massive success for the band, pushing forward their aggressive sound and message to a new generation. Their follow-up release, Bullet in the Head, went on to discuss the premise that the government control the population through the use of mass media. Given that Rage was signed to Epic, a subsidiary of multinational corporation Sony, this was bound to draw criticism.
Yeah, I mean, that was a question that obviously came up day one. You know, Rage Against the Machine, signing to a machine.
There were a lot of skeptics who kind of wondered, well, how can a band that's so, you know, against, you know, multinational corporations and big business be signed to a label like Sony? On the one hand, you could look at it and say that's hypocritical, but at the same time, it's like, you know, who buys the records of the guy that plays the coffee shop with his acoustic guitar? You know, is his message getting anywhere?
I think if they hadn't have signed to Sony, the record that we did may have actually gotten lost. But Sony was able to, with their big corporate machine, was able to get it heard.
I view Bullet in the Head as a product interpretation of their own situation, where they know that they're using mass media, that they're using multinationals, that they're using capitalism to spread their message. And the most committed of the left has always called them sellouts for going through that way, for not going to DIY fashion like Minor Threat and Bad Brains and all those movements of the punks. But Zack and Tom were smart enough to be able to acknowledge that and to also just do this biting commentary. It's almost like they didn't mind smacking themselves, but to make the bigger point about, look, even though we're part of this, we know where we are. We're in the game, but we're not of the game yet.
This time the bullet called Rocha. Yellow ribbon instead of a swastika. Nothing wrong about your propaganda. Rules follow rules when the set commands ya. Said it was blue when the blood was red. That's how you got a bullet blasted through your head. Blasted through your head, blasted through your head. And give a shout out to the living dead. Stood and watched this offense called centralized. Soldiering on the screen, you was mesmerized. Cellular phone sounding up death too. Corporations called turn you to stone before you realize.
The ideas needed to get out there. The issues needed to get out there. The irresponsibility of our government from the standpoint of things that people needed to see from the other side and information that wasn't really translating to the masses needed to get out there. And that became more important than the commercial, conflict of signing to a record company and being in the position of actually making income and money with it.
Rock and roll and the wider genres of which rock and roll is sort of the forefront, all have built in a kind of rebel image. And that means that anytime they have a commercial success, they're accused of selling out. That situation becomes even more difficult for a political band. But here's the paradox. You can be a very successful band in a small place and have a big impact on a few people without perhaps selling out or without making any money, or you can have an impact on larger numbers of people. And that puts you into the commercial matrix. There's no way out of that. We all live within capitalism. There's no pure place to stand outside of it. So musicians who make money, if they put that money to good use, actually have done a part of their protest work right there.
I think how the band chose to use the vehicle became more important than the resources they derived from it.
Just victims of the in-house drive-by. They say jump, you say how high. Just victims of the in-house drive-by. They say jump, you say how high.
It's culture jamming, you know? Culture jamming was something that came up during this era that had to do with seizing the means of production and seizing the means of media production in order to change the message. And I think Rage Against the Machine as a band sees itself in that same tradition of people who were trying to influence or comment on mainstream media by making or connecting with mainstream media.
Rage's awareness of the power of the media was clear, as throughout their career, their music videos would not only promote a song which had a message, but also include information highlighting other issues at the same time. However, their understanding of how to use the media was no more apparent than during their time on the Lollapalooza tour in 1993. It was on the Philadelphia leg that Rage Against the Machine set a precedent and proved there was more to them than just music.
During Lollapalooza in 1993 at the Philadelphia tour stop, Rage goes out naked, except the only thing they're wearing is electrical tape on each of their chests. They're each wearing one letter spelling out in electrical tape, PMRC, the Parents Music Resource Coalition, formed in the 1980s to alert parents to the dangers of rock lyrics and to lobby in Washington, D.C. for I don't know what, stricter control, a ratings system. We ended up with parental advisory stickers on records that were deemed to have potentially dangerous or offensive content. They go out with tape across their mouths to show that they're mute, they can't speak, these letters on their chests to show that the PMRC are perhaps the forces of censorship and oppression, silencing the voice of Rage Against the Machine, and they play 25 minutes of feedback. Supposedly the story is that Zack Rocha has blown out his voice and can't actually sing that night, so this is the stunt they come up with. It's kind of great. If you look at the pictures, you think, wow, that's amazing.
That famous protest, they were booed by the audience. They're like, it was their Dylan at Newport moment. They knew what they were doing. They knew they were going to risk ridicule, but they were making their specific point. And, it just so happened also that Zack probably wasn't going to be able to sing that night. But nevertheless, they used that to such a magnificent purpose. And it wasn't even so much drawing attention to themselves. It was drawing attention to the hypocrites the idiots who were trying to censor American music at the time, or the people who always try to censor music.
While protest music is perhaps the most famous kind of protest art, there are many other kinds, and performance art is one that has been very influential in a lot of movements. When Rage went naked to protest at a particular demonstration, they were in a long tradition of connecting music and other forms of artistic expression, other forms of artistic protest. That's nothing unusual, nothing new, and I think all of us have the right to protest in whatever form we wish. The idea that if you're a musician, you should only protest through your music, or if you're an artist, you shouldn't say anything because you should speak with your images, that seems to me really silly and all very undemocratic. We all have the right as citizens to speak and act and express ourselves in whatever way we choose. And if we happen to have a variety of artistic media that we can use, we should do that.
It made an impact for forever in people's minds. It's not something they did 30 shows in a row. It's not something they did twice. I imagine that people who went to that show to see the band at that point in time certainly walked away frustrated. But I guarantee you, as they reflect on it now, they felt like they saw history.
Despite upsetting the fans and some bad press regarding their naked protest, Rage Against the Machine's first assault on both the music industry and American society had been an undeniable success, not just commercially, but more importantly to the band, in raising awareness of social activism and the issues that the band supported. This was in no small part down to the guiding, if often opposing, forces of both Zack and Tom. The messages conveyed in their debut album had been a direct assault on American society and government, on racism and oppression, and harked back to the days of Guthrie and Seeger, uniting and inciting, as Rage brought their contemporary sound to some long-term issues. But Rage's focus was not just a broad sweep over the faults in American society. Holding a magnifying glass up to individual cases in the mold of significant protest artists that had come before, such as Bob Dylan, the band used their music, its power, and their popularity to highlight specific causes throughout their career, such as that of Leonard Peltier, whose conviction for murder in 1977 was seen as a grave injustice by many, including Rage, and was highlighted in their video for the track Freedom.
There's a tradition in rock and roll of taking on the causes of individuals who some consider outlaws and others consider wronged by the system. Bob Dylan famously took on the case of Reuben Carter, wrote the song Hurricane about him when he was perhaps unjustly imprisoned. Steve Earle, the country artist, has become an extremely ardent advocate against the death penalty. And the West Memphis Three are three young men in jail for murder that bands like Pearl Jam and Metallica have taken on as a cause. So Rage Against the Machine supporting someone like Leonard Peltier, it's really not that unusual in the rock world to find a cause, to find a person to rally about.
Leonard Peltier was a Lakota Indian who was out one evening with his friends. There was some kind of incident, the details of which are a little sketchy or not available, basically. It depends on which side of the fence you're on. At the end of the evening, there were 2 FBI agents killed, and Leonard Peltier was of a mind that there's no way that they're going to believe me. There's no way they're going to believe my story, and he fled. He fled to Canada, and ultimately he was convicted, and he's been in jail. His fleeing, I think, for some people was all the convincing they needed to have that he was guilty.
Anger is a gift.
Come on!
Rage Against the Machine adopting his cause and trying to free him, it's topical in a way that, say, somebody like Bob Dylan was with like The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll, where you see something specific in the culture. Maybe you pick up the newspaper one morning and, somebody's died that shouldn't have died. And, you write a song about it, or, in Rage's case, you get your fans to write letters to free Leonard Peltier, or, you play concerts for Leonard to try and save him. I mean, it's sort of like cause is not equal, but John Lennon with John Sinclair and the 10 Will Get You Too. It was like, this doesn't seem right. We should use the influence we have to try and make a change, make a difference, try and free somebody who's, rotting in a cell right now.
It's easy to talk just about anti-capitalism or anti-fascism. It's quite something else to highlight specific cases and involve yourself very intimately with those cases in order to better understand it for yourself, but also to better explain it to the world at large.
I think you kind of have to find out for the fact that, was that Zack or was that Rage? I think a lot of that focus came from Zack. Timmy and Brad may have said, yeah, that's a great thing that we should do, but I think that was really more Zack. Whether their fans understand it, because a lot of the fans just like to hear the music and they like the sound and they like how it makes them feel, where Zack was really trying to say something and actually kind of help someone.
Another case of injustice that was championed by Rage was that of Mumia Abu Jamal. Convicted in 1982 over the killing of Philadelphia police officer John Faulkner, Jamal's situation had come to the attention of the band, who have been fervent supporters of his appeal and release from death row.
Mumia Abu-Jamal was a black activist from Philadelphia who in the 80s was convicted of killing a police officer in broad daylight. He's always protested his innocence, and the case was a travesty of justice. You know, it remains to be seen whether Mumia killed the police officer or not, but it was a joke of a trial. And so all the activists have been asking for the past, almost 30 years now, is let's retry the case. He's always been sitting on death row, and also very eloquent activist on his own right. It's something that only the most left of the left would ever have heard of the case, but Rage Against the Machine, specifically Zack, quickly took up the cause of Mumia. So the phrase "Free Mumia," it's still a chant or a rallying cry that's heard at progressive protests all around the world.
Mumia is a controversial figure, however. His case was extremely popular among left-leaning people, young people especially, during the time when Rage Against the Machine was coming up. Mumia is an articulate man. He was a writer himself, and he's one of those figures who it just seemed impossible to someone like Zack de la Rocha that he would be imprisoned. At the same time, you know, it's unclear whether or not he actually committed the crimes that he was accused of. So some people find him to be a very problematic figure.
Rage Against the Machine raised awareness of Jamal's situation by holding a benefit concert in 1999 to help fund the ongoing appeal against his conviction. However, their support for this type of cause was not without controversy due to the nature of the case.
Rage played a benefit, and they took a lot of heat for it. Like Howard Stern, it's like, what are these guys doing? You know, why are these guys playing a benefit for this cop killer? Howard Stern doesn't really do nuance, but even so, I think there was some outrage. People were concerned, like, how are they possibly doing this? And there was a significant amount of heat trying to get them to cancel the gig. And when they did come out, because they did play the gig, Zack made a point of addressing people in the beginning and just saying, hey, you know, if we thought that Mumia had killed anybody, we wouldn't be here. But the reason we are here is we don't think he did, and we think that the charges are unjust, and this conviction is unjust. It was a very unpopular cause in a way, in terms of like the broader culture. In some ways, it's sort of that same thing as coming out naked on stage. There's probably more people who were unhappy about it than were happy about it. But in the interest of staying true to the message that they'd been, you know, that they'd established, it's something they had to support.
I think the issue is free speech and people having information. People can choose to do whatever they want with that information. I don't think the band ever concerned themselves whether or not people walked away from enjoying the band because they didn't agree with particular issues.
One form of protest music that is a very difficult one to pull off is when you bring a case about a single individual. The example that's probably perhaps most successful was Bob Dylan's song about Reuben Hurricane Carter. He did seem to have created a song that powerfully impacted the context in which Carter was being looked at and may have very much played a role in his eventual release from prison on what seemed to have been a very trumped up set of charges.
Pistol shots ring out in a ballroom night. Enter Betty Valentine from the floor above. She sees a bartender in a pool of blood. Cries out, they've killed my love. Here comes the story of the hurricane. The man the authorities came to blame for something that he never done. But in a prison cell, but one time he could have been the champion of the world. 3 bodies lying there, does Patty see? And another man named Bello moving around mysteriously. I didn't do it, he says. He throws up his hands. I was only robbing the register. I hope you understand.
Other people who have been in that similar situation, like Leonard Peltier or Mumia Jamal, they have had a much more difficult time getting their case heard, reheard. The American injustice system frequently makes mistakes and very seldom remits those mistakes. So protest songs by Rage Against the Machine and many others on those issues have had limited effect. When you have a protest song, the powers that be always try to pretend that you're not having that impact. So when you have something as obvious as a single individual case, it's very difficult to get the impact to be successful.
Following on from the success of their first album, a sustained break occurred before the band went into the studio to record their next release, to be titled Evil Empire. In the 3 years that had passed, tension between the four members, most notably between the two principal frontmen, were coming to a head. This appeared to be mainly down to their political differences and how they were to address the nature of their message.
What happens between the first and second record is they seem to have a miserable time trying to work together. They've found something. Their first record comes together extremely quickly. Happens with a lot of bands. And the second record is miserable by all accounts. They, for a while, go to live in a house in Atlanta to try to write a second record. They come away with exactly nothing. Later, in talking about it, Tom Morello will say they were there for 5 months, and their A&R man will say they were there for less than 4 weeks. That'll tell you how miserable it felt. It was less than a month. It felt like almost half a year to Tom Morello.
In the way they've always been toward the same direction, I've never really been able to understand why there was a falling out between both of them. If I had to guess, I think Zack is much more power of the people, roots-based music, while Tom, he seems to be more in the union, in Spanish you would say el sindicato, the union sort of movement. That's why Tom, he got involved, for instance, with the efforts to boycott Taco Bell, and also that's why he created his alter ego, the Night Watchman. Meanwhile, Zack, he seems to have always been more getting in protest with people. From the beginning, though, they seem to have that same philosophy. Somewhere along the line with Rage, those two philosophies diverged and created the people who they are today.
Tom's vision of the band and Zack's vision of the band were very different. I almost like to say that Zack was the soul of the band and the actual street level of the band, and Tom was more of the business-driven. Let's get the Rage brand big, stuff. I do know that there was one day that I actually showed up at the studio, and the band had a 13-hour meeting. I didn't know what was said in the meeting, but you could tell after the meeting when they came in, things were tense. And I think that followed through in the actual second record. I do know them speaking to friends that were involved in it, that it took them 3 years to make it. There was like fighting going on, and then Zack wouldn't be in the room with the band, and the band wouldn't be in the room with Zack during that record. And I do know that Timmy and actually Brad were the ones that actually kept it going and kept it moving forward because Tom and Zack were just fighting.
I think the best analogy I can make is if you're in a relationship and everybody gets along every day and like, how you doing? I'm okay. Nice to see you. You're bored out of your mind. But when it's fiery and you agree on something, if you don't agree and things get feisty and things get out of control and it's passionate and full of energy, it's also one of the most intense and enjoyable and miserable, messed up experiences, but it's that volatility that makes it so interesting. And that angle did exist within that band.
After a delay that almost brought about the breakup of the band, Evil Empire was released in May 1996 to critical acclaim as Rage continued their tirade against the powers that be.
Evil Empire is where Tom Morello's Harvard education comes into the fore in some ways. It's very much an analysis, a look at what's wrong with America in terms that Noam Chomsky or Howard Zinn, popular political writers, would endorse. I think both Zack and Tom are very well read and very passionate participants in a community of not just protests, but analysis of corporate life, American politics, and imperialism especially. The title Evil Empire invokes the idea of American imperialism, which as a Mexican American is extremely important to Zack de la Rocha.
The Evil Empire, that was just a maturation of Rage Against the Machine, the original album, because the original album was just really adolescent anger. Just everything that they've had pent up, they just threw it out there, roared. It was really a roar. Evil Empire was, I'm not going to call it subdued, but it was much more thoughtful. Very much, now also much more specifically political, with political agendas, because the first one was just, again, just rage, anger. Evil Empire, People of the Sun, talking about, you know, the conquest of the Americas and the continued suppression of Latinos in the United States.
The video for People of the Sun was used to highlight another cause close to Rage Against the Machine, the plight of the Zapatistas in Mexico, and in 1999 the band played a benefit concert in Mexico City.
In Mexico, the worst people have always been the Indians. They've always been maligned, they've always been exploited, and in southern Mexico, that's the last area where there's a huge concentration of Indians. And there's one state in particular, right on the border with Guatemala, called Chiapas. That's the worst of the worst states. So in '94, a lot of those indigenous people, led by a man named Subcomandante Marcos, who no one really knows who he is, they decided to stage a violent uprising where they got guns, and the Mexican government immediately came in, massacred people. This was in late '94, and ever since then, the Zapatistas have been trying to create their own autonomous community within Mexico. The Zapatistas have always been this magnificent cause for the left, and specifically Mexicans in the United States, because they tie into one of the great heroes of Mexico, Emiliano Zapata, one of the heroes of the Mexican Revolution, and his idea to create Mexico into a brand new state was giving land to the people. That's what the Zapatistas want. They don't want to secede from Mexico. They want autonomy. They say, we have our lands. We have our lands that we've been here for thousands of years. Leave us alone and let us be. So Rage Against the Machine, they've been highlighting that forever. And Zack de la Rocha has gone down to be with the Zapatistas for months on end, many, many times, ever since '94.
As many of you are aware, there's a revolution happening in southeast Mexico. In Chiapas, a state rich in resources but poor in standard of living. There are those who will no longer accept the poverty that the current system offers them. These people are known as the Zapatistas.
Everything can change on New Year's Day. Everything can change on a New Year's Day.
When the Zapatistas first spoke to the world on January 1st, 1994, their word carried the echoes of a 500-year struggle for the basic elements of human dignity. There's once again revolution in Mexico, and the Zapatistas remind us that we must hold governments responsible for their support of oppressive regimes like the one in Mexico.
The Zapatistas are important, but they're important for people to know, but they're also important in how they influence Zack specifically in his political philosophy.
I would say it might be his main issue is sort of how America has colonized people of color. And I think that really is a strong presence on this album, Evil Empire.
Evil Empire continued Rage's targeting of American government and society, and the lead single, Bulls on Parade, focused on corporate arms companies that perpetuate war for their own profit at the expense of people's lives and liberties.
Bulls on Parade exposes a history of international arms trade that you could say had its flowering, its evil flowering, during the George W. Bush era. The song remains relevant today. Perhaps it became even more relevant when the current Iraq war overtook us.
A track like Bulls on Parade was really almost prescient because we went into Iraq and it became a business, with the private contractors going over and, getting the, I forget the exact term, it's like no-tell type bids where, the government had no oversight. In essence, the government was handing out, millions of dollars to people to rebuild the infrastructure of Iraq, but they weren't government agencies doing this. It was people who basically saw it as a second gold rush,
Bulls on Parade was really just, it was, again, a metaphor. They're great in that sense, and in that way they're a little bit different from hip-hop and more toward poetry where they're using metaphor. Bulls on Parade is just it's almost like War Pigs in that sense. You could have a direct corollary between War Pigs and Bulls on Parade, the use of imagery of violent animals standing in for these arms dealers, standing in for these governments who all they want to do is perpetual war, going back to the idea of the evil empire, which of course Reagan or Bush would turn into his axis of evil, this obsession in American presidents to always have this enemy upon which they could rally the nation, and more importantly, upon which the federal government could expand and make billions upon billions of dollars going off and killing people. So Bulls on Parade was very much an attack and a critique of that.
Running around the family with a pocket full of shells. They ran around the family with a pocket full of shells. They ran around the family with a pocket full of shells. They ran around the family with a pocket full of shells. Weapons, not food, not homes, not shoes, not need, just feed the war cannibal animal.
But even at the time, Bulls on Parade was completely connected to things that were happening. I think Zack de la Rocha may have been thinking of the first Iraq War, may have been thinking of the situation in Latin America where the American government had allegedly funded dictators and the drug trade. I think those incidents and his knowledge and his understanding of those incidents is really what inspired the song. The fact that it sounds relevant today only tells us that this is a long history and a major issue.
Not averse to an opportunity to make a statement, and especially one that utilized the power of the mass media, Rage Against the Machine had been invited to play on an episode of popular US comedy series Saturday Night Live, an episode that was guest hosted by American business magnate Steve Forbes.
Rage Against the Machine were booked to play Saturday Night Live, and typically their guests get two songs. You get one maybe 20 minutes in, and you get one in the close. And after their first song, they went over their amps and tried to hang inverted American flags. And the producers noticed what was going on, and basically pulled the plug on the second song. And on paper, you'd be like, okay, well, you're losing an opportunity to play your music, but of course, if everyone knows that you're supposed to play two songs on Saturday Night Live and you only play one, that's a big news story.
You can look at that in retrospect, but that's not their plan. I don't think, if that was a plan, then their contrived adventures would be much less interesting. They really wanted to get the flag out there. Whatever happened because of that happened, but that wasn't their intent.
Containing tracks such as Viet Now, raging against right-wing Christian radio broadcasts, and Down Rodeo, taking a swipe at shopping culture in America, as well as referencing the Black Panther movement and the LA riots, Evil Empire contained vast amounts of information and a range of issues for its listeners to support or learn more about.
The second record, much like the first, rages against ideas rather than specific situations. I know that both records contain lyrics that address some specifics, but they tend not to be writing songs about actual specific events. They're not writing the lonesome death of Haiti Carroll. You know, they're not Bob Dylan opening up the newspaper and saying, that gives me an idea. I think I'm going to write me a song. You know, they're guys who are reading a book and saying, that is a powerful set of complex ideas about the dynamics of geopolitical, economic oppression. I think I want to yell.
Rage is sincere. You know, there's a lot of bands that have an image, or they're trying to present an image, or trying to, my experience, or at least in the realm of time when I was working for them, there was no question that they were sincere. Through and through, what they had to say, how they were going about saying it, what methods they could use to say what they're going to say, dealing with everything from trying to keep ticket prices down so the kids could come see them, to presenting the image with the most, or not the image, presenting the message with the most impact.
Well, Evil Empire was a huge commercial success. It spawned Rage's most successful single, which we still hear more than any other song of theirs on the radio or see the video for. Some critics thought they were fantastic. Others thought they were representing a kind of politics that was outmoded, naive, this kind of hard line, almost Maoist communism that some accuse them of, and that I don't think they would deny in some cases, was not seen as very sophisticated by people involved in certain political arenas, including leftist political arenas. But at the same time, there's just no denying that it hit the kids, and really, that's where the spirit lives, is with the kids. So, fuck the critics.
Evil Empire had firmly established Rage Against the Machine as the band that was trying to make a difference by highlighting both specific and general issues and attaining popularity within the mainstream as a no-holds-barred protest act. Despite their critical and commercial success, tensions within the band persisted, and another hiatus followed before the release of their third and final original album, The Battle of Los Angeles, in 1999. An album aimed once again at perceived flaws and injustices in American society and culture, it also contained strong Orwellian undertones and was released a year prior to the US presidential election of 2000. The nature of the music on the album, along with Rage's back catalogue of protest songs, turned out to be an integral part of the voice of the people, as demonstrated when protests turned to riots in Seattle, 1999, during a meeting of the World Trade Organization.
For anyone who doubted the presence of protest or the efficacy of the left in the mid to late 90s, what happened in Seattle in 1999 really brought it home that there was a generation out there committed to direct action and even violence in the name of their cause. In Seattle that year, there was a gathering of the World Trade Organization, the most powerful people behind international global capitalism. And protesters flocked to the city and staged huge, huge protests that became riots and seemed to threaten the city itself. This shocked people who were not aware of what was happening at the ground level in leftist politics at the time. And it really made Rage Against the Machine seem like the most relevant band, because here was a group that had put out a record about street fighting, about direct action connected to those movements, and now it was happening on the front page of the newspaper, on CNN. It was everywhere, and nobody had gotten it quite as much as Rage Against the Machine.
"1999 and the dawn of the new millennium proved to be a busy time for Rage Against the Machine in terms of taking direct action. Having played in Mexico City in support of the many causes they championed in the country, and also controversially playing a benefit concert in aid of convict Mumia Abu-Jamal, Rage once again turned their attentions to the United States government and corporate finance. The band teamed up with protest filmmaker Michael Moore to record the video for their first single of their new album, Sleep Now in the Fire, where they played in Wall Street, outside the New York Stock Exchange, forcing it to cease trading an hour early.
Throughout Rage Against the Machine's career, their goal was always to speak directly to power. And with the video for Speak Now in the Fire, they literally went to the most powerful financial center in the world, the New York Stock Exchange, and shut it down. And for, a rock band of, 4 guys and, some instruments to shut down the most powerful financial institution, even for an afternoon, was, quite a brilliant coup.
Jesus bless me with its future, and I protect it with fire.
Rage Against the Machine became very skilled at creating a media event. They were media events. I don't think that any of them would deny that the video they made with Michael Moore at the Stock Exchange was a media event. They meant to create a spectacle, and they did. Got written about in the newspapers, they made a great video. Did that particular action on that day accomplish anything? Pretty much no. Did they manage to take down capitalism or convince people that capitalism was evil? No, actually, capitalism did that all on its own about 10 years later, and we're all suffering because of it. At the same time, they very successfully learned how to manipulate the media, which is better than they themselves being manipulated by the media.
I don't think activism ever goes out of style. I don't think it ever becomes, I think there's always something to address. I think there's always something to question. I think there's always something to, the fact that the media is, is feeding you information. And I think that, that bands always need to question. I don't think it ever becomes less important.
Rage nailed that. Rage, and mixing with Michael Moore, it was great. You had two guerrillas of their particular movements uniting together to make a really great video, to do, again, a lot of this renegade filmmaking, renegade music making right there on Wall Street, playing their music, then getting the heck out of there before the feds could come in and nab them.
For it's the end of history. It's caged and frozen still. There is no other pill to take. So swallow the one that made you ill. Maria, Papita, La Santa Maria, the Lucen, the Rapist, the Fields Overseer, the Ages of Orange, the Priest of Hiroshima, the cost of my desire to sleep now in a fire.
A band called The Machine Rages On, or Rage Against the Machine, is anti-family and it's pro-terrorist.
I think by the time of the video for Sleep Now in the Fire, Rage Against the Machine had sort of established themselves as sort of like the musical equivalent of a panic button for the establishment, because basically wherever they went, a riot followed. There was that sense of like, this is a band that's really looking to stir things up at all turns. And so I think, there might not have been a need to shut down the New York Stock Exchange, but I think just their presence there, it made people nervous, and it made them wonder what was going to come next.
What was to come next was Rage's involvement in raising awareness regarding voter options during the forthcoming elections. Once again teaming up with filmmaker Michael Moore for the video, Rage's second single from the Battle of Los Angeles, Testify, put forth the idea that there was little difference between the two main political parties.
The moment the Battle of Los Angeles arrives in 1999, we are gearing up for a presidential election in America. And Rage means to tell us it doesn't matter who you vote for. It is all the same. The American political system lives in fealty to a capitalist overlord. I would venture to say that that's quite a reasonable idea, and probably correct. And yet, what came to pass showed how wrong and potentially bankrupt that idea could be, because we got exactly the wrong guy in the White House, George W. Bush, and it did make a difference.
With Testify, Zack was being a prophet. He was calling what was going to happen. And, you know, after 2000 was 9/11, then the whole expansion of the war on terror. That's what happened. In 2000, we were living in the dot-com era. Everything was seemingly, you know, coming up roses. No one was really questioning what the government was going to do at the time. Only the people on the left, the anti-globalization movement, Rage Against the Machine.
I remember being frustrated by the idea that George W. Bush and Al Gore were the same in the eyes of Michael Moore and Rage Against the Machine. In fact, I think history would pretty much play out that they were not the same. And in this, Rage Against the Machine may have been overstating their case. At the same time, with a video like Testify, they were being true to their anti-capitalist agenda and worldview. In the worldview that Rage Against the Machine and Zack de la Rocha, as their main writer, puts forth, anyone who leads a country that is based in democracy as defined by global capitalism is inherently corrupt. And that's what Rage Against the Machine was saying in that song. I wonder now if someone like Tom Morello would say, well, yeah, actually, Al Gore might have been a better choice at that time. But this was the time when Ralph Nader was presenting an alternative. A lot of rock and roll people were looking for something outside the two main parties and thinking the two-party system was irredeemably corrupt. And we still had enough hope to think that we could make a difference in that system. Too many years of George W. Bush changed the viewpoint, I think. At the time, it felt right.
Continuing their undertaking of direct action, Rage Against the Machine set about to make a statement by performing a concert right outside the Democratic National Convention in Los Angeles. Rage were clearly following in the footsteps of protest artists that had gone before them by using their music to galvanize the public into standing up to the establishment.
Brothers and sisters, our democracy has been hijacked. Brothers and sisters, our electoral freedoms in this country are over so long as it's controlled by corporations. Brothers and sisters, we are not going to allow these streets to be taken over by the Democrats or the Republicans. This next song is called Wolves on Parade.
The message has always been the same from the first Rage album through the third one, through the choice of art, through the music. You know, the Black Panther sign, the fist up, and also just the title, The Battle of Los Angeles. They were referencing specifically the incident that happened to them at the 2000 Democratic National Convention. Again, this is the Democrats. They're supposed to be the liberals, the progressive people, and yet you had a near riot happening outside the Staples Center. You had this entire counter-protest. Instead of the Democrats allowing these people in, they wouldn't allow that to happen.
I actually attended the concert, and you could see the delegates from the Democratic National Convention out on the balcony looking down at the concert. But there was a 15-foot high barricade, and you know, every effort was made to make sure there was no intermingling between the two parties. I think at that time you could tell, much in the way of like the New York Stock Exchange, you could feel there was something in the air. There was an energy there. And there was, you know, there was a lot of anger and there was a lot of excitement, you know, and predictably, it was after Rage Against the Machine finished playing, but the riot police came in. They cut, Ozzo Motley was performing, they cut the mics, and, you know, the National Guardsmen with the rubber bullets came in, and the, you know, the shields, face shields, and, you know, they made everybody disperse. But I think at that moment, you know, it was again, you know, here's Democratic National Convention, you know, one of the most, you know, monumental and powerful institutions in American politics, and here's Rage Against the Machine next door with their little megaphone saying, hey, we don't like it, you know, we don't believe in what you're doing.
Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me.
Power, as the phrase goes, never concedes itself without struggle. But those in power very seldom admit that they're influenced by things like protest demonstrations. There's a famous example of Richard Nixon during the Vietnam War. There were thousands, hundreds of thousands of people protesting outside the White House. He claimed he was just watching football on TV. We later learned from his memoirs that he was shaking in fear that this huge crowd was going to perhaps even, invade the White House. He was deeply affected by it, but part of the struggle is to find the courage to continue even when you feel like you're not being effective. And there's never a direct link. Nobody sings a song and the next day the issue is resolved. There's always a time lag. And so the effectiveness has to be in some degree taken on faith. But one can look over time and see that the authorities who claim to be ignoring your protest song were in fact being deeply affected by it.
Their third record is, without any doubt, their best record, and interestingly, they're most successful on both specific and general levels. So you have in a song like Guerrilla Radio a distillation of everything they thought their music could be about, both lyrically and musically. This is what they want. They want to turn the radio into a guerrilla force. And the end of that song, which basically slows down and very quietly and all the more powerfully for a moment of quiet in a Rage Against the Machine song, says, if not you, who, if not when, if not right now, when? When is change going to happen if you don't do it and you don't do it right now? This is enormously powerful. At the same time, Zack de la Rocha has been protesting on behalf of Mexican revolutionaries on an almost daily or weekly basis in Los Angeles. He's been to Mexico. He's written his most specific set of songs. He's addressing the death of a sweatshop worker. He's come with something both more successfully general and more successfully specific than he ever has before.
The Battle of Los Angeles was a huge success for Rage Against the Machine and was well received both critically and commercially. Yet this came at a price as the tensions within the band became intolerable, and in October 2000, Rage Against the Machine split up.
I think with the Battle of Los Angeles, you start to see the tensions that would eventually cause Rage to break up for so many years. I think Tom Morello has always been interested in finding new sonic textures. Obviously, Brad and Tim are, you know, they're rocker dudes. They want to get the best sound possible. It's Zack that starts to have the crisis of faith, that starts to wonder if maybe things are getting too mainstream, if the band is getting ahead in front of the politics.
It's sort of ironic that Rage Against the Machine broke up just before the 2000 election. In some ways, if you were a believer in their politics, you would say that there was never a time that they were needed more.
For a group that was as prescient as they were, as being right at the forefront of all this progressive movement, of calling politics in the United States, of nailing the culture right before it happened, for them to have broken up right as W was going, to me it will always remain both a mystery and a disappointment. I know why they broke up. I know they couldn't stand each other anymore. I know they had to take a break. But to remain basically silent for the next, 6 years until they reunited for Coachella, and then it might have even been 2007, and then do their limited tour. You had 8 years of one of the worst regimes in American history, and the voices being either completely silenced or reduced, vastly reduced.
They went through a very, very kind of horrible divorce. I guess Tom and Zack didn't like each other, and I think Tim and Zack fought a lot too, you know, so it's sad. And I guess that they just had to kind of, you know, honey, I gotta leave, you know, so it's sad.
After 7 years and 3 highly successful albums, Rage Against the Machine, the voice of the people, was no more. Despite their breakup, a further album was released in December 2000. Renegades was a covers album featuring tracks by artists such as Bruce Springsteen and NWA that have proved influential to Rage over the years. Zack continued to pursue a solo career, whilst the remaining 3 members joined with former Soundgarden frontman Chris Cornell to form Audioslave, which saw some limited success and acclaim, although the nature of their music was not based in protest. However, during this time and after Audioslave's eventual breakup, both Morello and De La Rocha had turned their attentions to their solo work, which had less of the aggression and energy of Rage Against the Machine, and more of a folk spirit, in the mold of artists such as Dylan, Guthrie, and Seeger.
Zack and Tom, they are very smart. Again, as I talked about earlier, they're very smart. They know the current that they're writing. They know the arc of the movement that they're a part of. And the part of that movement does go back to Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie being amongst the people, playing their music, giving it out to the masses, and also getting all that movement and then going to the bigger masses at large and making money off of that for themselves. But then that music trickles back to the movement at large.
Apart from Rage Against the Machine, you look at the stuff that Tom Morello has been doing with the Night Watchman, it is much more in the tradition of like a Woody Guthrie, kind of like more of the quiet acoustic, and, you know, like it's not such, it's, you know, minus kind of all the bells and whistles and stripped back to just kind of like the music, the lyrics, and, you know, a mindset of challenging authority.
I counted to 100. I kept losing track. I wrote 100 letters, no one wrote back. I told 100 stories, and all of them got twisted. I sang 100 songs, nobody listened. You gotta rise to power, rise to power. Baby, you gotta rise to power. You gotta rise to power, rise to power. Ain't a shade of difference between the heroes and the cowards. Baby, you gotta rise to power.
Historically, looking back upon Rage Against the Machine, it totally makes sense that they came to their glory during the 1990s. They're born of both the music and the protest movements of that era. Yet there is a kind of a tragic irony in the fact that they weren't around when things were getting really bad in America. I do think they were inspired to reunite at the end of the George W. Bush era, partly in hopes of intervening, in hopes of leading to a new era, which arguably they have.
In 2007, it was announced that Rage Against the Machine would reform to play the Coachella Music Festival. And in the true fashion of Rage, they were timing their return to coincide with the run-in to the 2008 presidential election.
To me, just as much a mystery of them breaking up is why they decided to get back together. It'd be too cynical for me to say money, and I don't have any proof of that. I don't think, though, that they would have gotten back together because they saw this new progressive activist in Barack Obama out there. No, if anything, the fact that a man like Obama was popular and didn't get elected, it's almost a vindication of their own political philosophies.
Anytime a band gets back together, everybody wonders if it's because of the money. But when Rage Against the Machine gets back together in 2007, as America is gearing up for another presidential election, and, you know, no joke, we said this about the one in 2004, but the most important presidential election in my lifetime, possibly in the country's history, if we, cross our fingers, get to keep having a history, yeah, it was an important moment. You know, for these guys, I think they looked around and said, this isn't a time we want to sit on the sidelines. You know, we put ourselves on the sidelines at a really weird moment. You know, right around the time that things changed for the worse. Let's see if we can get back in the game, maybe be part of the change for the better that we believe in.
I did speak to Warren Etner, who used to manage Rage, and he said that they're actually having fun now. But if they went back into the studio, I think that same feeling that they had when they were making all of the records would actually come back. So I think them actually playing and to actually let people that have never seen them see them play live, it's one of the best shows that you will ever see.
During their tour of the US and Europe, Rage Against the Machine continued to support the causes that were close to them, as well as focusing on new areas of protest against the American government that had arisen during their breakup. With the inauguration of President Barack Obama, Rage's place as a protest band came under question.
They're timely no matter when they play. You know, they're timely no matter who's running the country. I think they have, they have plenty to speak to at any given moment. So you'd have to ask them about whether or not they were, that part of their thought process was it's an important time for us to do this, considering what's going on in America.
Until the world is perfect, which I think we're probably still a ways to go, there will always be reason to have protests. And in the United States, it's very much a tradition that left liberal regimes get as much critique as ones on the right, because there's always further to push. And sometimes, in fact, protest is more effective against a liberal administration than it is against a conservative one.
Now, the election of President Obama has been a magnificent and significant change for this country. What it will not change, and what it will never change, is the fact that there are poor folks who feel trod upon. Unfortunately, discrimination of one form or another, whether it be black-white problems or immigration problems, but there'll always be a need to point out injustice where it's found.
As a band that had set many trends in music and protest alike, Rage's mission had certainly been accomplished. Whether they were taking direct action by standing shoulder to shoulder with those in the streets, or using their position and the media around them to put forward an important message and educate the public, Rage Against the Machine struck the right chord at the right time and proved that it is possible to stand up to the establishment and take the power back.
There's that Public Enemy record, Welcome to the Terror Dome, that ends with a voice saying, "What's the future of Public Enemy?" and then the record just ends. The implication is that there might be no future, that the future is unwritten. I'm sure if you ask the Rage guys, they'd love to play you the end of that record. What's the future of Rage Against the Machine?